It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Every couple of years, not because I have to, because I want to, I decide to sit down and write a book. You know, books, or whether you use the audio version or what have you, they last long beyond a radio show or a TV show or podcast or any of the sort. They just do. And a book provides an opportunity for the writer to express things and research things that it's impossible to do on a radio or television show. Now, there's different things that you can express and explain in real time on a radio and a television show or a podcast. But when you write a book, if you write a good book, if you write a book that's going to be lasting, that's not just a quick hit and grift and so forth, it doesn't work that way. Writing a book is very solitary. And I've told you before, when I write a book, I think of you. That is, what you might be interested in, what I feel maybe you should know. It's a completely different format. It's a completely different approach. Now, everybody's brain is complicated. It kicks into gear one way when you're at home and you're relaxed. It kicks into gear another way when you're at work. Kicks into gear yet a different way when you're, let's say, going to school or reading books, as an example. It's the way it is. People are not one-dimensional. They're multi-dimensional. You're multi-dimensional. Whatever you do, it doesn't matter. You're multi-dimensional. And you know what I mean. So I've written, you know what, I didn't even count. I think 10 books I've written. 10 books. On a myriad of subjects. First book I ever wrote was about the Supreme Court. Men in Black. I didn't want to call it Men in Black. The publisher at the time, Regnery, insisted on it. I said, well, that's the name of a movie. But Men in Black, even though Sandra Day O'Connor was on the court, and last time I understood she was a woman. I wanted to call it Judicial Tyranny, but it didn't matter. It was the same thing. The next book I wrote, I didn't intend to write, was called Rescuing Sprite. About our wonderful dog and dogs and the event of having to put him to sleep and the impact it had on our family. And the third book I wrote turned out to be a blockbuster, Liberty and Tyranny. It was a book I wanted to write for 20 years. And it came out simultaneously with the Tea Party movement. One fueled the other. I won't go down the long list. The last book I wrote, of course, is The Democrat Party Hates America. It's the longest book I've ever written. Almost 100,000 words, give or take. But the book before that, during the pandemic, was called American Marxism, a very, very important book, which sold almost 1.4 million copies. You know, it's very interesting. The publishing industry is very flat right now. Very flat. Fewer and fewer people want to read. The audio element of books is doing quite well. People are in their cars or you're busy. Maybe you have to go to something that bores you and you put the plugs in your ears and you listen. Or you have a long drive during the holiday. Myself, I like to have a book. A hardback book. That's just me. I got to thinking. I've written books about liberty. I've written books about philosophy. One overlaps the other, as they must. Really, they're books that flow seriatim, intentionally so. So if you put aside the first two books, Men in Black and Rescuing Sprite, all the other books sort of fit like a puzzle. As I said, the last book was The Democrat Party Hates America. Now, there was a boycott of the book at several retail outlets, and that's too bad, because it's everything you ever wanted to know about the Democrat Party. But I got to thinking. And when I get to thinking, I keep a little pad here and there, and I write little notes to myself. I got to thinking. You and I together, we've explored liberty. We've explored unalienable rights. But as I got to thinking, I realized this is crucially important, liberty and unalienable rights. That's our declaration. For many people, that's our faith. But when I write about liberty and when I write about unalienable rights, I often have to talk about tyranny. Crucially important, again, liberty, rights, and tyranny. And I've talked around another subject, I realized, over the decades. I've written around this subject, I realized, over the decades. And those of you who listen to this program and have a very keen ear will probably know what I'm talking about. Those of you who watch Life, Liberty, and Levin or our Blaze digital program will probably know what I'm talking about. It's a word, it's a subject that each and every one of you have to deal with each and every day. It's a matter that can be discussed psychologically, ideologically, philosophically, and in the context of the civil society, the context of politics and government. What is this word? It's power. Power. And so the book is called On Power. On Power. And I think it's going to be very fascinating and intriguing to many, many, many of you who listen to this program. I broke it into 6 basic chapters, and I decided to write this book a little differently. It's the most concise book I've ever written, which means it was much harder to write. It has the least amount of second-party or third-party quotes in it, even though there are some in there, because I want to always give credit to sources if I got an idea or thought from another source. I believe that's the ethical and moral thing to do. But there's not hundreds of endnotes. I spoke to the publisher and I said, I want the book to be more compact, easier to carry, put in a purse, put in a glove compartment, so we did that. I said, I want the book to be under $28 because $28, $30, $32 is what everybody's charging for books. I said, I don't want to do that. So it's $26.99. The hardcover. You'll be able to get audio too, if you wish. And I said, I want the cover to be basic, like a classic old school cover. And that's what it is. And when I write a book, I throw everything I can into the book. You know, when I wrote American Marxism, that was a extremely difficult book to write. And so you know, and I'll get into the substance in a minute. I'm not allowed to tell you all about the substance, but I always kind of diss the publisher and give you more information than I'm supposed to, and I'm going to do that tonight and in some of the preceding weeks. What happens, I write the book. I write it not 14 times, I write it once. I don't outline it except when I start writing it, then I have my thoughts, then I outline the chapters as I go along. And I want to make sure one paragraph integrates with the next, one chapter integrates with the next, and so you have a book that makes some sense. And those of us who are authors, the process is you write it, then you send it to the publisher, and they have two types of editors. A book editor who looks at it, reads it, makes suggestions, has thoughts, says you might want to think about this or that. I have a wonderful editor. And then you have copy editors. Go through, maybe you should capitalize this, and maybe you should put it in present tense rather than past tense. So after you write, it goes through all that. And it goes through 3 or 4 rounds of that. And I'll tell you as an example footnote, in American Marxism, there's a group called the Frankfurt Institute, a communist group that was in Berlin. And the Frankfurt Institute is mentioned many times in American Marxism, and once it's called the Franklin Institute. Apparently one of the copy editors changed it, but the book is, I don't read it over and over and over and over again. I didn't catch that. And so you'll have critics who don't accomplish very much, who spend a lot of time on the internet. And their idea of criticizing somebody is attacking them rather than on a substantive and intellectual and scholarly level. And so like last week, one of them from a magazine called The American Conservative, which is nothing but a sort of a Huey Long kind of thuggish magazine with mostly Neanderthals who spew the same stuff. And this guy, it looks like he walked into a propeller. Yeah, but Mark Levin said Franklin Institute. What kind of scholar is he? He says Franklin. Look, if you don't put your chin out there, if you don't put your neck out there, if you don't do things, then you're never going to be criticized. But if you do, then you'll be attacked. It's the nature of the beast. It's okay. It's okay. This book is very different than any other book I've ever written. It is very readable, and yet much of it is my own independent thinking and reasoning and trying to understand this word power. And so the first chapter is called On Power. The second chapter is called Negative Power. So to the best of my knowledge, I've created this idea of negative power, and I express what that means in a full chapter. Followed by, of course, the third chapter is on positive power. What does that mean? The fourth chapter is on language, positive language and negative language. The fifth chapter is on rights. And the last chapter is on liberty. So power, negative power, positive power, language, rights, liberty. And you're thinking, you're in the car, maybe you're sitting at the dinner table, and you say, what the hell does this have to do with me? It has everything to do with you. And that's why I picked this topic after thinking about it. It has everything to do with you. This is what determines if you're free or you're enslaved. If you have liberty or not. So I want to delve into it just a little bit when we come back, more than my publisher would want me to. And just so you're aware, a couple hours ago, it's quote-unquote, it populated on Amazon, meaning the site for the book and the information, it's all now on Amazon.com. It's also on most of the other retailers' sites as well. It takes a significant process to do this, apparently. The audio isn't up there yet, but it'll be up there in the next 24 hours. But the Kindle is the hardback copy. So I want to talk about it. You can check it out on your own. We've linked to it on every single one of our platforms and on the mother site, marklevinshow.com, to make it as easy as possible for you to take a look. As easy as possible to take a look. And when you pre-order a book, that means, depending how early you pre-order, you're the first to get the book when it comes out. It lands on your doorstep the moment it is released in the order of the people who order it. And you'll get substantial discounts that aren't showing right now. But during the course of the next few months before it's released on July 29, if it's a 35, 40, 49%, you'll get that deduction.
Mark Levin.
Making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
Now, this is in my book, On Power. Again, you can grab it at Amazon.com. A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Jasser decries the preaching and writing of somebody named Sayyid Qutb. Now, you might say, who's Sayyid Qutb? He's known throughout the Muslim world, especially in the Middle East. One of the most prominent thought leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood and political Islam. And he explains that while the roots of Islamism can be traced back hundreds of years, again, as opposed to Muslims, we're talking about Islamists, with the ideas of pure Islam, that's what they call it, pure Islam. Qutb's 1964 book, Milestones, has significant influence even now. Now, as I point out, Qutb often mentions Jahilyyah, Jahilyyah, which he defines as the state of ignorance of the guidance of God. Here's what he writes in part. What is extremely significant about this is that Qutb's view, the entire Western world was riddled with Jahilyyah. The same time he considered most Muslims of his time to be suffering from such ignorance. Jahilyyah, due to what he considered by watering down through the ages of pure Islam, in part because of Western influences, but also due to what he considered Muslims tampering with the purity of Islam so that it no longer existed. Now, this is what we're dealing with in Qatar, in Iran, among other places. Qutb saw it as his mission to revive pure Islam with its very strict interpretation of Sharia law and to never give an inch in terms of adopting or compromising with Western values, which he considered devoted to materialism, violence, and racism. And then finally, as Jasser notes in his book, here's what Qutb writes. I'm quoting from Qutb's book. Our foremost objective, now this is the Muslim Brotherhood, what sprung from the Muslim Brotherhood. He wasn't the first, but he was one of the most influential. It is what's read now by Islamic Jihad, by Hamas, by the Islamo-Nazi regime in Iran and the Islamo-Nazi regime in Qatar, and so forth and so on. Qutb wrote, our foremost objective is to change the practices of this society. Our aim is to change the Jahili system at its very roots. That's the West. This system, which is fundamentally at variance with Islam, and which, with the help of force and oppression, is keeping us from living the sort of life which is demanded by our Creator. Our first step will be to raise ourselves above the Jahili society, Western society, and all it causes and its concepts. We will not change our own values and concepts, either more or less, to make a bargain with this Jahili society. Never. We and it are on different roads. And if we take even one step in its company, we will lose our goal entirely and lose our way as well. That's quotes. There's more in the book, but I'm just giving you a little touch of this. Consequently, as I point out, the constant bloody wars among different Muslim sects, including in Syria and Yemen and Lebanon and elsewhere, and the targeting of the West by a long list of Islamist organizations such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Al-Qaeda, as well as Islamist states that support terrorism such as Iran and Qatar and others, provide ample evidence of the bloody Islamist impact both within individual countries and throughout the world on Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Like Marxists, Islamists obviously reject liberty, but Marxism rejects faith altogether and in fact insists on the eradication of not only faith, but like Islamists, all historical and social ties that contradict or compete with its ideology and delay or interfere with the inevitable revolution. And it goes on in a much more comprehensive way where I explain and talk about the fusion of Marxism and Islamism. And again, the mindset of Islamists, the mindset of Marxists. And this is in the chapter where I talk about negative power. So when you read this book, you read that section, there's a lot more to this book than the Marxists and the Islamists. It's about on power, its effect on your life, its effect on whether you're free or you're not free. Look, there have been great philosophers throughout history that have written about it. Probably a score of them. I mean, Socrates talked about it, Plato wrote about it, Aristotle wrote about it, Cicero wrote about it, Hobbes wrote about it. I can go on and on and on, and in more modern times and so forth. But that's not what I'm writing about. What they wrote about is not what I'm writing about. And I try to apply it to everyday America, to Mr. and Mrs. America, to what's going on in our country, what's going on outside our country, how it affects us. A lot of focus on what's going on with our government right now, the judges right now, what they're doing to President Trump. Again, it's a piece of it. A lot of focus on the Democrat Party, what they advance in terms of negative power, negative language, what it is that they do that influences and, in fact, in so many ways, controls our country. I also talk about the belief system of Jews and Christians, the Judeo-Christian concepts and understandings, how completely different they are than from the Islamists. They know it, and we know it. And so when we negotiate with a Qatar or an Iran, or not just them, when we tolerate the invasion of people from these parts of the world who are inculcated with that ideology and have no intention of assimilating into Americanism, it has a consequence on our country. It has a consequence on our colleges and our universities and throughout our country. And so you're going to learn about all this, the people who are involved in it, as well as more and more about our own country, our sovereignty, where that comes from, our belief system, why we live in a country like this that is diverse and accepts diversity, and why people live in other types of countries where they don't. They even kill people of their own faith because they're not pure enough. Chapter 1 is on power. Chapter 2 is on negative power, the way I segregate this. Chapter 3 is on positive power. You'll certainly understand it as time goes on, or at least my representation of it. Chapter 4 is on language. It's critical. Chapter 5 is on rights. Chapter 6 is on liberty. As I said, I've written 10 books, 8 #1 New York Times bestsellers. Millions and millions of you reading these books, as are millions and millions of you listening to this program on every available platform. We've talked about liberty a lot. We've talked about rights a lot. What we haven't talked about a lot, although we've talked about it in the sense of references to it, is power. Power. And it is a way of rethinking through, or at least adjusting somewhat, how we think about what's taking place day to day in our own country, actually in your own community, and certainly with foreign governments, and how so many of them, literally from a mindset and ideology, look at things completely differently than we do. And this is one of my concerns when we're dealing with Islamist regimes, terrorist regimes. I mean, on the face, they're terrorist regimes. They're called terrorist regimes for a reason. That means they don't believe in civility, they don't believe in so forth and so on. And what you'll find more in the book is there's even a word and an ideology for the Islamists that they use among each other about deceit. And in the chapter on negative power, I talk about communication. The chapter about language, I talk about what kind of language is used. You know, in tyrannies, whether they be Marxist, fascist, Islamist, whatever they are, and by the way, in democracies too, more and more, language is used to deceive, to confound, to confuse the public. More and more. So this is unlike any book I've ever written. It's tighter. It's more concise. There's some quotes, like the quote I just read to you, but less quotes, more my analysis, my reasoning about these things. And it's written for you. for you, the American people. You can go to the link on Amazon.com directly, or on my Twitter site, or True Social site, website, marklevinshow.com, the mothership, or any of these other social sites. You know, I don't promote our social sites almost at all, do I, Mr. Producer? We almost have 5 million followers on X, and I never even mention it. Maybe I should mention it so we can get up to 10 million, but it doesn't matter. I'm not interested in the grift. I'm not interested in the hits. I'm not interested in the clicks. I am mission-oriented. I'm an activist. But I want to inform. I want to provide you with information, at least from my perspective. You can check it out. You can disagree with it. You can do whatever you want. But that's where I'm coming from.
Mark Levin.
You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
I want to read something to you. If I can find the damn thing. Here it is. What I love about this book on power is the lessons that it provides, not because of me, but the lessons that it provides, and it applies to everyday events that are going on, and your life, as a matter of fact. Now, it doesn't come out until July 29th, but if you order it now, you're going to get the most massive discount that anybody gets, because whatever they discount it from today all the way to sales day, you get the best discount of all. And the way Amazon works is, with all its books, in fact, with all its products, it has significant discounts before the books are published, or even before the products are available, in order to encourage people to buy them, because they're a warehouse. They move them in, they move them out, they move them in, they move them out, and that is to your advantage. That's the inside baseball when it comes to books. So what I do every day, in addition to us getting the clips together, in addition to going through all the news information, in addition to all that, what I've been doing is going through my book to say, okay, let's get a few relatively concise passages that are relevant to what's taking place. We can have a little bit of fun talking about them, and you can see if this interests you or not. So I delve into sort of the middle of chapter 1 on power. In our country, the American Revolution and establishment of a republican government were intended to secure the traditions, customs, and values of the society, as concisely set forth in the Declaration of Independence. Unlike the French Revolution, the purpose of which was to destroy the existing society, not only the ruling monarchy. Indeed, the Declaration is one of the most concise yet brilliant statements about humanity and society ever authored. This is not to say that other Western democracies lacked similar intentions, but America's purpose was known and declared before it was even a functioning country. That is, from the very beginning. And its ultimate governmental design, the national constitution, was a direct outgrowth of this purpose, not an imposition by an elite few, since the representatives of all the colonies participated in its development from the Constitutional Convention to the state ratification conventions. So, when establishing our own government, the debates among the delegates to the Constitutional Convention and later in the state ratifying conventions focused almost entirely on how to balance the necessity of centralized power to secure the civil society and preserve individual liberty, with the recognition that in creating such an entity, they risked imperiling the American experiment if the conferred power was not offset by competing powers. For the framers, the answer was a mixed government. In essence, they adopted John Locke's overarching governmental model of separating power and Montesquieu's more precise description of government divided between and among these three entities, legislative, executive, judicial, each with relatively specific and distinct responsibilities, yet constantly competing with the others for power. Now, Montesquieu is the most widely read and cited philosopher during America's constitutional period. He's referred to directly in the Federalist Papers multiple times. And in his iconic book, it is a remarkable book, The Spirit of the Laws, Montesquieu explained that, and I quote, "Democracy and aristocracy are not free states by their nature, political liberty is found only in moderate governments, but it is not always in moderate states. It is present only when power is not abused, but it has eternally been observed that any man who has power is led to abuse it. He continues until he finds limits. Who would think it, he wrote. Even virtue has need of limits, he said, so that one cannot abuse power. Power must check power by the arrangement of things. Power must check power by the arrangement of things. What I'm reading to you, the framers of your Constitution and the ratifiers of your Constitution read also. A Constitution could be such that no one will be constrained to do the things the law does not oblige him to do, or be kept from doing the things the law permits him to do. Indeed, hundreds of years later, ladies and gentlemen, the late British Christian theologian, scholar, author, one of the favorites for me, C.S. Lewis, underscored Montesquieu's point about the abuse of power disguised as virtue. He famously wrote, "Of all tyrannies," did C.S. Lewis write, "a tyranny exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It may be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell on earth. Their very kindness stings with intolerable insult. To be cured against one's will and cured of states which we may not regard as disease is to be put on a level of those who have not yet reached the age of reason. In other words, treating us like children, or those who never will. To be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. Isn't that the left, the Democrat Party today, and some Republicans too? Tyranny, when people are preaching good intentions and virtue. Montesquieu further warned, as I point out in the book, that should the distinct nature of these branches dissolve, this is crucial to what's happening today with the courts, should the distinct nature of these branches dissolve and transition from separation of powers to the concentration of powers, the result would be tyranny. Here's what he said. When legislative power is united with executive power in a single person or in a single body of the magistracy, there is no liberty, because one can fear that the same monarch or senate that makes tyrannical laws will execute them tyrannically. Nor is there liberty if the power of judging is not separate from the legislative power and from the executive power. If it were joined to legislative power, the power over the life and liberty of the citizens would be arbitrary, for the judge would be the legislator. If it were joined to the executive power, the judge would have the force of an oppressor. Got it? That's why this book is important. All would be lost if the same man or the same body of principal men, either of nobles or of the people, exercised these three powers, that of making laws, that of executing public resolutions, and that of judging the crimes or the disputes of individuals. Now notice, too, Montesquieu's observation that tyranny is not unique solely to despots, but is also to be feared in the form of groups, bodies, mobs, even legislatures. At the same state conventions, they were debating whether to ratify the proposed Constitution. In Federalist number 51, James Madison, the father of the document, echoed Montesquieu when he wrote, "Human beings are imperfect and ambitious, so we need a government structure that guards against abuses of power. Ambitions be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. in framing a government which is to be administered by men over men. The great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the government, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. This is a famous part of the Federalist Papers, number 51, because those sentences are absolute genius. He didn't invent the idea, but the way he articulated it. I write, so much of life orbits around this word, this idea, this belief, power. And most of the discussion, to the extent it exists at all in an honest or coherent fashion, is in the form of generalities, sloganeering, demagoguery, and the like, used by politicians, media, ideologues, and academicians to manipulate, confound, and deceive, in which case power is used to control thought, discussion, and language. This book is intended to provoke a better comprehension of what is meant by power, its impact on the individual mankind generally, and stimulate a broader examination and dialogue about its application. In doing so, if it succeeds, even modestly, perhaps it will prove an additional source for liberty against tyranny. It's a couple pages out of the first chapter on power. And again, this is just a tiny little taste of what's in this book. One part of the discussion and the reasoning about power. There's so many subjects in what is a very concisely written book, plainly written, easy to understand. Much of the debate we're having about the Middle East now, it's not really a debate. We're right and they're wrong. Much of the discussion that's going on about the Middle East today misses an entire point. We Americans, we people in the West, we have no idea about how the Islamists think, what they believe. We enter into agreements with them, economic agreements, military agreements, maybe even a nuclear agreement. And what does an agreement mean to them? Let's put aside the current events. Go back whenever you want. What does an agreement mean to them in the context of an Islamist ideology? You know, next hour we're going to have our friend Zuhdi Jasser on. This guy is brave. He served in the Navy in a significant role. He's a Muslim gentleman. He's a reformer. It's important to understand what he says. It's also important to understand what others have said, including those who've written, who are repeated, who are taught, who are memorized in Gaza, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran. All of our new friends, what they think about us, why they use the money the way they do. And by the way, for all the anti-Semites out there talking about, neocons, it was always a lie that the Jews had all the money. You see who has all the money today, Mr. Producer? Qatar, Saudi Arabia. The Arabs have all the money. So let's get that hate. Let's get that straight now.
Mark Levin.
The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
You know, those who've listened to this program over the decades, my principles have never changed. My views have never changed. We can adjust them from time to time, depending on what events are taking place. But I don't get involved in wild gyrations when it comes to policy and that sort of thing. Principles are principles. I didn't evolve into a fifth column isolationist. I never was, quote unquote, a neocon. I'm not for war. I'm for national security and protecting the American people from an Islamist Nazi regime with a nuclear weapon. This is common sense. Foreign policy, national security is about prudence. It's not about bigotry. It's not about sloganeering. It's not about new ways to look at the world. I'm looking at this Qatar thing. We have a $1.2 trillion deal. That is great. But Qatar is spending billions and billions of dollars trying to destroy our country. It's destroying our colleges and universities. Does anybody dispute that? President Trump doesn't dispute it. He said so in 2017. So who's disputing that? Nobody. So I point it out. I give you the information that demonstrates it, proves it. It's called evidence. Here's the other thing. I don't agree 100% with any government official, with any politician. None. Not even with Ronald Reagan, and I worked in his administration for 8 years. It doesn't mean I dislike the person, doesn't mean I hate the person, doesn't mean there's a divide, doesn't mean there's a defiance. You know, this is a mature country that requires mature people. And people have their own opinions. Where I draw the line with this administration and this president is the attempts to destroy him and destroy his presidency and destroy his life. And I fight it, and I fight it more effectively and aggressively than anybody else. I fight against these efforts to destroy this man. And I will continue to do so. You know why? He's my friend. And God forbid if the other side wins, because they are nuts. That doesn't mean I'm going to agree on everything. I understand there are websites out there. I understand there are isolationists and other buffoonish individuals who want you to believe that when I express my opinion, there's something nefarious about it. There's something notable about it. I'm on the radio 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm on Fox with 2 shows. I'm on The Blaze. I write books. It's important that you and I have and we do, this special relationship and this loyalty. People don't always have to agree with me, and they don't, and you don't. That doesn't mean you hate me. I'm going to tune you out. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But so what? In terms of my viewpoint, how do I even adjust my opinions with all the gyrations that go on, all the changes that go on? My opinion is my opinion. What I am not is a sycophant. And so the left media is confused about me. I thought he was a sycophant. So when he disagrees with Trump, that's very notable. I'm not a sycophant. I express my own opinions. I think Donald Trump is a fantastic, historic president. I have my own opinions when it comes to a whole bunch of issues, especially when it comes to terrorist regimes and what they're doing to our country and what they've done to our ally Israel. That's it. As a red-blooded American. So a lot of the reporting, a lot of the media are by people who want hits, people who want subscribers, people who are grifters, people who stir the pot. I don't sit here and stir the pot. When I deal with people like Chatsworth Osborne Jr., I'm reacting to them. He got in my face. May get in my face again. I'll slap his ass again. That's fine by me. It's okay. I'm not going to obsess over it. I've got other things to do, other things to discuss with you. We have a country to save. We have an economic system to protect. We want these tax cuts across the board, as deep as possible. You know, I love the Democrats. Tax cuts for the rich. Spending for the government. That's what they want. Spending for the government. Open borders. Illegal aliens. All kinds of people coming into the country, harming us. That's what they want. We have to defeat them. We have to fight them. So when it comes to President Trump, you know, 80%, 90% of the issues we agree on. And he's persuaded me on a number of issues. And I feel when he asks, I've persuaded him here and there. Who knows? That's the nature of being a rational human being. That's the nature of thinking and thinking for yourself. It's not controversial. These headlines are crazy. That's nuts. Crazy. The Middle Eastern landscape is reshaping before our eyes. Blink, and you'll miss something. As people try to modify maps and redraw lines, history is unfolding at this very moment. The nation of Israel stands naturally at the center of these groundbreaking events. Many believe that what happens in the Middle East has never been more important and never more filled with potential and fraught with peril. Many also believe that Israel's enemies are America's enemies. I happen to believe that, certainly in the vast majority of cases. Christians United for Israel, that's right. Christians United for Israel has 11 million active members. It's one of America's largest pro-Israel organizations. And these isolationists, these Soros, Koch, isolate, they ought to attend and lecture the 11 million members about the genius of their isolationism. Well, it's leading the charge to help keep Americans on Israel's side. This summer, join thousands of us, pro-Israel Americans, at the 20th annual Christians United for Israel. I'll be one of them, and my family will be there. We'd love to meet you. It's a summit in Washington from June 29th through July 1st. It's going to be fantastic. And while you're there, you'll learn from leading Middle East experts and make your voice heard. Don't be a bystander to history. Jump in with both feet. We're talking about the birthplace of Judaism and Christianity, the Holy Land. Register for the 20th annual CUFI, Christians United for Israel, CUFI Washington Summit today at CUFI.org. That's CUFI.org. Use promo code Levin25. That's LEVIN 25. Be a part of this grassroots movement. Join the millions and millions of us and be at the forefront of history. The Republican Party. I'm proud of them today. I'll be proud of them when they pass the massive tax cuts. There's a lot of reasons to be proud of the Republican Party under John Thune, Mike Johnson, and Donald Trump. A lot of reasons. In the Jewish Insider, most congressional Republicans insist on no enrichment for Iran. 2 letters signed by the majority, overwhelming majority of House and Senate Republicans urge Trump to reject any nuclear deal without complete dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. Why are they doing that? Bought by the state of Israel? Excuse me. It's the Arabs with all the money that are busy buying everything and everyone in sight. They're the ones with the money. Qatar more than anybody else. Nearly all Senate Republicans sent a letter to President Trump today urging him only to agree to a nuclear deal with Iran that requires the full dismantlement of Tehran's nuclear program. 80% of House Republicans, 177 lawmakers, signed on to nearly an identical letter. Now, the Senate letter, led by Senators Pete Ricketts, Ted Cruz, and co-signed by every single Republican senator, except Rand Paul, of course, calls on the Trump administration to follow through on its explicit warnings that Tehran must permanently give up any capacity for enrichment. That's the language. And I support this, too. If we can get Iran to do that, no need to drop bombs. If we can't, then there is a need to protect our country. The House version of the letter was led by Representative August Pfluger, Republican Texas, the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, the largest conservative caucus in the House. The Republican Study Committee is the largest conservative caucus in the House. Every Republican in the Senate except Rand Paul. I would say that that's an overwhelming position of the Republican Party. The letters, drafts of which were first reported by the Jewish Insider last week, serve as a clear message to the president from congressional Republicans. I don't think it's a message to the president. I think what they're showing the president is, we support what you're trying to do. You said the total dismantlement, and we agree. We are behind the total dismantlement. They said you and your administration have therefore correctly drawn a red line against any deal that allows Iran to retain any enrichment capability. The Senate letter reads, pointing to the language used in Trump's national security presidential memorandum on Iran, in conference from him and Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, about the need for full dismantlement. We cannot afford another agreement that enables Iran to play for time. as the Obama deal did. The Iranian regime should know that the administration has congressional backing to ensure their ability to enrich uranium is permanently eliminated. As I said, this wasn't throwing anything at Trump. This was endorsing his stated position. The letters make the case that verification protocols to allow limited Iranian nuclear enrichment, as were used under the 2015 Obama deal and have been floated by some administration officials, are no longer a viable solution. So, folks, 80% of the House Republicans, every single Senate Republican but Rand Paul, stands with me and I with them. The President of the United States has said unequivocally, this is his position. I back it, the Republicans back it. It's the fifth column isolationists who don't back it. The Chatworths and the other lunatics. They don't back the president. We do. The letters make the case that verification protocols to allow limited Iranian nuclear enrichment, no way. That was the Obama deal. The letter goes on. The scope and breadth of Iran's nuclear build-out have made it impossible to verify any new deal that allows Iran to continue enriching uranium. The letters criticize the Obama deal, which they call deeply broken. They praised Trump's decision during his first term to withdraw from that deal, noting that he said at the time it allowed Iran to continue to enrich uranium and over time reach the brink of a nuclear break-in. And I've told you here several times, he called me to his side. He signed the document that withdrew the United States from that agreement, and he handed me the pen. It goes on to detail the Biden administration's alleged undoing of that pressure, functionally re-implementing the nuclear deal as they described it. As you predicted, those policies, they say to the president, indeed allowed Iran to reach the brink of a nuclear breakout, which is where they are today. The Biden administration made these concessions without any reciprocal concessions from Iran. And Iran even ceased providing international inspectors access to significant parts of its nuclear program in the early days of the Biden administration. So this is the consensus of the Republican Party, including those who were just elected, including those in MAGA. That's right. This is the consensus of every corner of the Republican Party, whether it's MAGA, whether it's rhinos, whether it's conservative constitutionalists, which are MAGA really, Tea Party, whatever they label themselves or call themselves. The lunatics with the Soros Koch crowd, it's a small cabal. That's what it is. Big mouths, thugs, bully people, threaten people, but they're nothing. They're a paper tiger. I promise you. That's what they are. A paper tiger.
Mark Levin.
We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
Well, birthright citizenship case in front of the Supreme Court. Really two issues. The issue of birthright citizenship and these national injunctions. We pulled some audio here that I think you're going to find fascinating. This is, of course, in my zone. And so we're going to spend most, if not all, the first hour on this, breaking it down for you so you understand on multiple levels what's taking place. I've talked about birthright citizenship behind this microphone for 20 years. I've talked about it on Fox. I think it goes back to like 2012 or something the first time I talked about it. I've written about it. It's all the basic information that has been used in the public square is information that I researched, analyzed, developed, and discussed and wrote about. And we're going to approach this from multiple vantage points. The arguments that are being made, the conduct of the justices, what your Constitution compels, the 14th Amendment, the power of the judiciary. We're going to take a look at all this because it's relevant to your life. Now, what's amazing is even though I don't address birthright citizenship per se in my new book on power, this falls right into the category, as some of the other things do, of what I write about in the book. So let's take a look at this. Let's listen into some of this first. You'll be disappointed, of course, with Amy Coney Barrett. She's gone to the dark side. That's just the way it is. She's gone to the dark side. But let's start with Brown. Ketanji Brown Jackson. Birthright citizenship case today. The Solicitor General is John Sauer, who was President Trump's lawyer in the Supreme Court, in the immunity debate, where he did very well. Immunity case. Cut 6, go.
I would think we'd want the system to move as quickly as possible to reach the merits of the issue and maybe have this court decide whether or not the government is entitled to do this under the law.
Now, hold on now. So what she's talking about are these nationwide injunctions. So her justification, which is perverse, it's a perverse logic. Her justification is, well, why wouldn't you want this so it gets quickly to the U.S. Supreme Court? Well, why would it get more quickly to the U.S. Supreme Court if you have a district court that makes a decision that's worthy of Supreme Court review? Then the court should take that up quickly from the appellate court. But that is not a justification for power being ceded to hundreds and hundreds of federal district courts. There's nothing in our history, nothing in our Constitution, nothing in any Judiciary Act that empowers federal trial courts to do any such thing. So Justice Jackson is basically a hack in a black robe. That's what she is. You can bet your mortgage. You can bet whatever you want on where she's going to come down on these big constitutional issues. You can bet it. It's always centralized power. It's always what I call, and I call it in the book, I coin a number of phrases, the deconstitutionalization of our government. She's deconstitutionalizing our government. Go ahead.
Having universal injunctions actually facilitate that. It seems to me that when the government is completely enjoined from doing the thing it wants to do, it moves quickly to...
So this is a speech on behalf of hundreds and hundreds of like-minded radical left-wing judges. She was one. I believe she moved from the district court to the Supreme Court, the district court in Washington. And so you see what she's saying. Well, if we can have these nationwide injunctions, then the Supreme Court essentially will be forced to take it up relatively quickly. That is so perverse. Well, maybe they should seize other powers, forcing the Supreme Court to take the case up relatively quickly. No? Go ahead.
Appeal that to get it to the Supreme Court, and that's actually what we would want. What I worry about is similar to what Justice Kagan points out, is that if the government is saying no lower court can completely enjoin it, it actually means that the government just keeps on doing the purportedly unlawful thing, and it delays the ability for this court to reach the underlying issue.
Now, what did she just say? She just said, with a national injunction, we'll get to the Supreme Court more quickly. Then she says, the problem with this is if a lower court is restricted to their district, which is what they're supposed to be, then the government just keeps doing whatever it wants. Maybe it's an unlawful thing. Well, why is that? The Supreme Court can still take up the appeal from the appellate court, the circuit court, whether it's in a district court. You don't need a district court having a national injunction. In fact, I would argue, contrary to her logic, that if you have a district court where the government is basically continuing to do illegal things, as she puts it, why wouldn't you? The case comes up to the appellate court and then goes to the Supreme Court. So listen to me carefully. I'm trying to explain this in plain English. You have a district court. They put in an injunction in the district court. They believe what the government's doing is illegal, but the government continues to do it in all the other districts. So you appeal the district court decision if you're an attorney, and you take it to the circuit court. There's not 700 circuit courts. And then from the circuit court, then you can go to the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court's worried that in all these other federal districts or all these other circuits, the government's violating the law, it still can take up the case. It takes up the case from the district to the circuit to the Supreme Court. None of that changes. None of it. the absurdity of what she's arguing, and Kagan, you know, they got the three stooges in on this. They're trying to get the fourth stooge. You know, the four women on the court. They're trying to get Barrett. Probably will. This really is cut and dry. This isn't even controversial. Let's go to Clarence Thomas. Cut 7. Go.
General, when were the first universal injunctions used?
We believe that the best reading of that is what you said in Trump against Hawaii, which is that Wirtz in 1963 was really the first universal injunction. There's a dispute about Perkins against Lucan's Oil going back to 1940. And of course, we point to the court's opinion that reversed that universal injunction issued by the D.C. Circuit and said it's profoundly wrong. Now, if you look at the cases that the either party cite, you see a common theme. The cases that we cite, like National Treasury's Employment Union, Perkins against Lucan's Oil, Frothingham in Massachusetts against Mellon, going back to Scott against Donald, and all of those are cases where the court considered and addressed the sort of universal, in that case, statewide issue of provision of injunctive relief. So when the court has considered and addressed this, it has consistently said you have to limit the remedy to the plaintiffs who appearing in court and complaining of that remedy.
So we survived until the 1960s without universal injunctions.
That's exactly correct. And in fact, those are very limited.
Stop. This is too important. This guy's a genius, Clarence Thomas. No wonder they try to destroy him. His point is, all the way up to 1963, we never really had universal injunctions. For almost 200 years, 180 years, give or take, we didn't have universal injunctions. We didn't have them. And now you have Jackson and Kagan and Sotomayor and no doubt Barrett making the case. Well, you can get your case to the Supreme Court more quickly. Why? What does that have to do with anything? Let's say, again as a footnote, you take a case to a judge in Boston, a federal district court in Boston. In Boston, let's say, is the jurisdiction. And you bring that case and you're the government, and somebody brings the case against you and you're the government, and the case brought against you, the court puts in place a temporary injunction. But the government can continue to do what it's doing in all these other jurisdictions. And Jackson says, so the government can continue to act illegally in all these other jurisdictions. Well, who says the government's acting illegally in all these other jurisdictions? Maybe that judge in Boston is wrong. Maybe the government's not acting illegally or unconstitutionally. So she's making a pretty broad assumption. But putting that aside, the case in Boston winds up, I think it's the Second Circuit over there, not sure, goes to the appellate court, the Second Circuit. But whatever it's called, it doesn't appellate court. And after the appellate court, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. So whether it comes out of a single district or it comes out of a national injunction, the Supreme Court still can take a whack at it. So Jackson makes absolutely no sense. She demonstrates she's an idiot and an ideologue, in my humble opinion. And then we have Clarence Thomas saying, okay, how did we survive without this for most of our history? Go ahead.
In the 1960s, it really exploded in 2007 in our cert petition in Summers against Earth Island Institute. We pointed out that the Ninth Circuit had started doing this in a whole bunch of cases involving environmental claims.
Mm-hmm. Ninth Circuit. Remember when the Ninth Circuit was crazy ass? That's why Jackson likes it, Kagan likes it, Sotomayor likes it, unfortunately, Barrett. Then we get into this issue. Well, let's let it play out. This is the Solicitor General, John Sawyer, really sharp guy. And Barrett. Cut 8, go.
General Sauer, I want to ask you about a potential tension. Well, no, not potential tension, an actual tension that I see in answers that you gave to Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Kagan. You resisted Justice Kagan when she asked you whether the government would obey within the Second Circuit a precedent. I'm distinguishing between opinions and judgments here. Did I understand you correctly to tell Justice Kagan that the government wanted to reserve its right to maybe not follow a Second Circuit precedent, say, in New York, because you might disagree with the opinion?
Our general practice is to respect those precedents, but there are circumstances when it is not a categorical practice. It is, and that is not
this administration's practice or the longstanding practice of the federal government. And I'm not talking about in the Fourth Circuit, are you going to respect a Second Circuit? I'm talking about within the Second Circuit. And can you say, is that this administration's practice or a longstanding one?
As I understand it, longstanding policy of the Department of Justice. Yes, that we generally, as it was phrased to me, generally respect circuit precedent, but not necessarily in every case. In some examples might be a situation where we're litigating to try and get that circuit precedent overruled and so forth.
Well, okay, so I'm not talking about a situation in which, you know, the Second Circuit has a case from 1955 and you think it's time for it to be challenged. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in this kind of situation. I'm talking about this week, the Second Circuit holds that the executive order is unconstitutional, and then what do you do the next day or the next week?
Generally, we follow those.
So you're still saying generally?
Yes.
And you still think
well,
that
I'll tell you why he's saying generally, Justice. Because the extent to which you people in the courts, particularly the activists on the circuit courts, and particularly activists on the Supreme Court, have taken the judiciary is way out of bounds from the constitutional construct. That's what he's saying or trying to say. The circuit issues a ruling, right? Let's say the circuit issues a ruling. An emergency hearing gets to the circuit, goes from the district court to the circuit, and let's say it involves national security. Let's say it involves something about a battlefield decision or a military decision by the president. And the circuit, and look, this isn't even beyond imagination. It's going on in Israel right now with their out-of-control courts, and we're getting close. We're getting close with the pullback of the planes from Venezuela filled with, or I should say El Salvador, filled with Venezuelan criminals. And let's say the Second Circuit says, no, Mr. President, this is the way that's to be handled in the battle and so forth. And he's saying we reserve the right to reject that. There you have literally a conflict of the branches where the commander-in-chief, the executive branch, has by far the better constitutional argument. And she's saying, are you telling me you wouldn't comply with the order? Are you telling me you wouldn't comply with the order? I wouldn't comply with an order that affected what's going on a battlefield or a military decision. Absolutely not. And she's appalled by that. So she seems to think the power of the courts are more powerful than the power of the Constitution. Well, judicial review, we get to make the final decision. Where the hell did that come from? An 1803 decision. That's not in the Constitution either. I'm just making the point that what the Solicitor General Sauer is saying is correct.